Hello students, welcome to iTTV. Today we are going to learn producing alcohol. From the previous lesson we have learned different types and the general characteristics of alcohol. We have learned the solubility of alcohol, combustibility of alcohol, and how it reacts with organic acid. But today we are going to learn how to produce alcohol. Let's start the lesson with fermentation process. Fermentation. Alcohol is produced from food like sugarcane, rice, grapes, and barley through a process known as fermentation. Fermentation is a chemical process in which organic molecules are broken down into simpler substances. So we have seen what is a fermentation process. It requires raw material, and from here we have seen some of the examples of raw material. Now using this raw material, it is actually a complex material. Now due to this fermentation process, it is broken down into simpler substances. Now let's learn more about this fermentation process. This process occurs in the presence of enzyme in an anaerobic condition. For example, glucose is broken down by yeast into ethanol and carbon dioxide. So in here, fermentation process in a general form is whereby glucose mixed with yeast produces carbon dioxide and alcohol. Now, alcohol is the simpler substances of glucose. Now, something is required in here, yeast. Now, what is the function of the yeast? Let's look at this simple experiment and see how glucose is broken down to alcohol and carbon dioxide. Here is a simple experiment to determine the fermentation process. We have an empty beaker filled with yeast, concentrated glucose solution, lime water, conical flask, transfer tube, test tube, and retort stand. What I'm going to do here is, I'm going to take this concentrated glucose solution and place it inside this empty beaker. This is to mix the and later I'm going to add these yeast inside and dissolve them. We stir until the yeast have been dissolved inside this glucose solution. So here we can see the yeast dissolved inside this concentrated glucose solution. We're going to place this mixture inside this conical flask. What I will do, I will remove this transfer tube, place this solution inside this conical flask. Make sure you stir the solution finally in order to make sure that the yeast has been dissolved again inside this glucose solution. Take this conical flask and place the transfer tube on top of this conical flask. The reason is, this is to capture the gas that is emitted by this fermented this solution in here. The gas that has been released will be transferred through this and goes into this test tube. Here what I will do is, I will take this test tube and place lime water. place this test tube in here, in the retort stand. Place this transfer tube inside this test tube. We will see what happens after few hours and few days of this process. From here, we can see that the glucose solution that is mixed with yeast have been fermented. And as you can see, this solution, the fermented solution in here, produces carbon dioxide gas, which is transferred through this transfer tube to this test tube that contains lime water. Now, as you can see, the air bubbles actually come out in here. The air bubble that escapes through this transfer tube is actually carbon dioxide, where it actually has created a cloudy solution in this lime water. So it confirms that carbon dioxide is present in this fermented solution. So we have seen this simple experiment. It looks quite interesting, and we have seen how glucose is actually converted to become alcohol and carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide in here is tested using a lime water. Now, from there we have observed that the lime water, which was colorless, have turned into chalky. Now, this is one of the confirmation tests to confirm the presence of carbon dioxide. Now, let's see what is the function of yeast again. Now, yeast actually produces an enzyme called zymase. Now, let's see what is this zymase function is. The enzyme from yeast called zymase acts as a catalyst to break down glucose into alcohol and carbon dioxide. To get alcohol, this fermented mixture is distilled. The alcohol produced is called ethanol. So in here we understand that the function of yeast is to produce a zymase enzyme. Now, this enzyme is actually a catalyst. Now, what happens to this fermented? How are we to remove the alcohol particle from this fermented liquid that we have in here? A distillation process is done. Now, there are certain things that we need to know and pay attention to certain requirements in the distillation process. Now, the first point is alcohol is evaporated at 78 degrees Celsius. Now, that is one key point that we need to know. Now, on top of that, we use this characteristic to actually remove this alcohol from the fermented liquid. Let's look at the experiment. The mixture is heated in a flask. Ethanol has a lower boiling point than water, so it evaporates first. So in here, in the solution itself, we have two things. One is the presence of water, another one is ethanol. Now you have to understand the boiling point of these two. Water has a boiling point is 100, as we know, but ethanol in here has a boiling point. It is at 78 degrees Celsius. So we use this characteristic to actually evaporate the ethanol in the solution itself. So we maintain and actually boil the solution at 78 degrees. Between 78 to 82, we boil the solution. So boiling process has occurred in here, and the alcohol actually evaporates away from the solution. So this evaporated material is the one that we are going to condense and finally collect at the end of the Liebig condenser. So let's look at the next slide and understand the following step. Ethanol becomes vapor at 78 degrees Celsius. The ethanol vapor is then cooled and condensed inside the condenser to form a pure liquid. The thermometer shows the boiling point of pure ethanol liquid. This is the sequence of events in distillation: heating, evaporating, cooling, condensing. From the solution there, let's start from the beginning. Water and ethanol mixture. At 78 degrees, ethanol has been evaporated from the solution. Now this happens because the boiling point of ethanol is 78. Now if you pay attention, there would be a thermometer on top. That is where a person who views the experiment actually controls the experiment, whereby it doesn't exceed at, for instance, like 100 degrees Celsius. So the control is used by observing the thermometer that is placed on top. Now this gas that is produced actually goes through this Liebig condenser. Now the function of Liebig condenser is to cool down this gas. So cooling process occurs whereby the gas has been condensed to become a liquid through a cooling process. Now what happens to this liquid? At last it is condensed and finally it will be dropped into a beaker. So that solution inside a beaker is the pure ethanol. So this is how a process of producing ethanol or even alcohol. Now let's look at the next slide. In here is a simple setup for distillation process. You can see the sequence actually starts from the boiling process in here. The boiling process actually evaporates and creates steam. This steam is then channeled into this tube and goes through this Liebig condenser. Now in this Liebig condenser, the water actually comes through in here, and as the water goes through in here, it goes up gradually and will be coming out in here through this black tube. Now why is it in this way is because the water is forced through this condenser, Liebig condenser, and goes up. By doing so, cooling process can occur evenly around in here. So that's why water is placed at the bottom, going against the gravitational force and is channeled out in here. So therefore the steam that comes in here will be cooled down to become water, whereby this water is then channeled all the way in here and will be collected in this beaker. So this is a simple sequence on how distillation actually occurs. A simple experiment on the distillation process. I hope you have learned in detail about the distillation process. Let's move on and see the uses of alcohol and its effects. Alcohol can be used as alcoholic beverages, medicine, cosmetic, solvent, fuel, and artificial flavoring in food. So here we have seen the uses of alcohol in our daily lives. So let's start from alcoholic beverages. Alcoholic beverages. Raw materials such as rice, barley, and grapes are fermented with yeast to produce different types of alcoholic drinks. The most common type of alcoholic beverages include beer, wine, brandy, and whiskey. Ethanol is the alcohol present in these beverages. So here we have seen some of the examples of alcoholic beverages. Now something for your general information. Beer is actually produced using malt or even barley, while wine is actually has a raw material such as the grape. So this is how we can see a difference between beer and wine, and the difference in using the raw material that we have learned earlier. So this is on the alcoholic beverages. Medicine. Alcohol is used as a solvent in the preparation of medicine. So here we see that alcohol is actually used to dissolve certain medicines. But let's look at some of the medicines and examples in here. Iodine is used as an antiseptic for wound treatment by mixing the iodine solution with alcohol. So an example of antiseptic that we can see in here is iodine. But you can't use pure iodine. So therefore, to dissolve it, we actually mix it with alcohol. So therefore, alcohol together with iodine is used as an antiseptic. Now, besides iodine, is there anything else? Alcohol can be used as an antiseptic. For example, methylated spirit is applied to the skin before an injection. So here we understand spirit is used to clear the infected area in order to put the injection. So this is one example. Besides that, there is also cough syrup. Let's see. Alcohols are also used in some cough medicine. So we have seen certain examples: cough medicine, antiseptics, and so on. But let's look in terms of cosmetic. Glycerol in the form of glycerin is used in the manufacturing of cosmetics. So we have seen some of the examples of alcohol being used in cosmetic materials. Let's move on to lotion. Moisturizing lotion. The moisturizing lotion contains glycerol, which is an alcohol. Glycerol absorbs moisture from the air. Glycerol is moisturizing lotions, keeps the skin moist and soft. So we have seen lotions and they actually contain alcohol. Now how about one of the most commonly used, solvent? Sometimes alcohol behaves as an organic solvent. So let's look some of the examples where it can dissolve certain materials. Paint, dye, perfume, varnish, printing ink and shellac are some of the examples whereby it can dissolve in alcohol. These are substances dissolved in alcohol but not in water. So you have to understand that alcohol behaves as an organic solvent. So these are the materials that we have seen from the slide itself, materials that can be dissolved in alcohol. But like example, paint, it can't get dissolved in water. So let's look at the next slide and see how it actually can be dissolved in paint. Alcohol is used as a solvent for perfumes, paints, dyes, varnishes, shellacs and printing ink. So lot of usage of alcohol. Now let's move on to fuel. Alcohol can be used as fuel in vehicle. The mixture of simple alcohols such as methanol, ethanol and propanol with petrol is called gasohol. Now gasohol is not practiced or is not available in our country, but there are certain countries that actually use gasohol. It's an advantage to them. Now let's look at the next slide and learn more about this gasohol. Car engines in some countries like Brazil have been equipped to run on gasohol. In this way, the dependence on petroleum can be reduced. The combustion of gasohol does not produce soot. Therefore, gasohol can be used as an alternative to fossil fuels to reduce air pollution. So you have seen the importance of gasohol in certain countries, whereby the dependence for petroleum will be decreased. Now let's look at another, whereby in artificial flavoring. Esters have fruity smell and taste. Many of them occur naturally in fruits and flowers. Although ester can be obtained naturally, they can also be produced from the reaction of alcohol with an organic acid. Artificial flavoring in food. Now let's look some of the examples of food whereby it uses this artificial flavoring. And here it is actually the most important person that plays the part is ester. Some example of these artificial flavorings include orange, apple, pineapple and banana. So we have seen all the uses of alcohol. Let's look at the effects of alcohol to certain parts of our body. Let's start from our brain. Brain. Slurred speech and irregular behaviors are the consequences of the effect of alcohol on the brain. When alcohol is taken excessively, it will lead to vomiting, unconsciousness, coma and death. So it is not good to consume alcohol in a very large quantity. There is certain limitation to it. Now, how is the effect if we consume alcohol too much? First, alcohol affects the forebrain and assaults motor coordination and decision making. 2. Then alcohol knocks out the midbrain and you lose control over emotions and increase chances of a blackout. 3. Finally, alcohol batters the brainstem as it affects heart rate, body temperature, appetite and consciousness, a dangerous and potential fatal condition. Now besides brain, it also has an effect with our nervous system. So let's look what happens to our nerve if there was excessive alcohol in our bloodstream. Consumption of alcohol disrupts the nerve coordination. It slows down the reflexes and delays reaction time. So we have seen how it affects our nerve. It delays the reaction time. This is one of the reasons why we shouldn't drink and drive. So we have seen two effects. One is to our brain and one is to our nerve. Finally, we see what is the reaction to our liver. The liver hardens and is unable to function, resulting in a condition known as cirrhosis. Cirrhosis is characterized by extensive scar tissues, fibrosis that stiffens blood vessels and distorts the internal structure of the liver. Cirrhosis causes the disability of the liver cells to remove toxic substances from the body. These toxic substances will accumulate in the body and may cause death. So we can see how a healthy liver actually becomes unhealthy. Now, the bad condition of the liver actually is known as cirrhosis. So, let's look at some of the questions and see our level of understanding in this topic. Question 1. Glucose, with the presence of enzyme, produces ethanol and carbon dioxide. The above process that occurs is an anaerobic condition in the presence of an enzyme is known as A. Ionization, B. Condensation, C. Fermentation, D. Vaporization. Now remember back the first experiment that we did. With the presence of a raw material like glucose mixed with yeast produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. But remember, this whole process is called, yes, fermentation process. So obviously the answer for this question is C, fermentation. Let's move on to question 2. 2. Dash can be used to remove shellac stains on the floor. A. Alcohol, B. Water, C. Palm oil, and D. Salt solution. So in here, shellac is there. Now how to remove a shellac? We need an organic solvent. And here, from what we have learned, a good organic solvent in here is alcohol. So the answer for this question is A, alcohol. Let's summarize what we have learned today. We have learned fermentation process. Now, fermentation process requires raw material. Now, a good example of raw material in here is actually glucose. Now, glucose mixed together with yeast, whereby yeast produces an enzyme called C-mase. Now, what happens in here? It actually produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. We also have learned how to remove this alcohol to distillation process. This distillation process occurs because of one characteristics of alcohol. It has a boiling point at 78 degrees Celsius. That's how we remove the alcohol from the solution itself, whereby it has a mixture of water and alcohol inside the solution. So when alcohol evaporates, it is actually cooled and condensed. And finally, it will be a solution at the end. So we have learned two things at the moment. But we also have learned the uses of alcohol and on top of it, the effects of alcohol in our body. I hope you have learned a lot of things of alcohol and you have learned some of the general information and knowledges about alcohol in this lesson. That's all the time that we have for this lesson. Thank you for watching iTTV. I'll see you in the next lesson. Goodbye, students.